I welcome ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh.
Yeah, so before proceeding further, I am recalling one famous quotation by Benjamin Franklin. He said that by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So, as we know that Benjamin Franklin was a great thinker and political philosopher of his time, and that is the reason he earned this coveted title of first American. So, I'll just quickly read out a profound profile of our guest for today's session, Dr. Anjali Midha Sharan. Dr. Anjali Midha Sharan has earned her PhD, Master's, and Bachelor's qualifications from Delhi University, a training from Council for Adult and Experiential Learning USA, Laureate Universities Network, Stanford University, and several other institutions, has enabled her in leading several academic and training initiatives for various stakeholders, including several senior executives of top organizations in domains of IT, power, oil and gas, infrastructure, aviation, port and shipping, telecom, and coveted government departments, higher educational institutions, and schools. She has been trained extensively by notable mentors in the field of psychology. Her PhD research focused on the importance of beliefs in the process of feeling. Through her participation in various forums, like the World Congress of Spirituality, and through various workshops and blogs, she has advocated the importance of positive beliefs in the process of healing and transforming lives, besides creating awareness about the various mental health issues. And through her academic administration experience of over 15 years, she has introduced several curriculum, delivery, and process innovations, resulting in improved learning outcomes and student experience. She has also trained several people belonging to different nationalities, has managed several programs at international locations. She has extensive experience working with various deans and American universities of repute, including UPS, where her last assignment was leading the doctoral programs of the university. So we are fortunate that ma'am is with us. She is having the position of Dean Research in GDGU University. So, ma'am, I would like to request you from your expert domain of research, please give some good suggestions, advice to our participants so that they can have a very good understanding of research. So whenever they are going for their dissertation, like in LLM, we are having dissertation, or whenever they are going for thesis in PhD, they will have a prior good knowledge and understanding how to proceed further, because planning is, although is very important in every aspect in every field, but when we are talking about research planning, this is very very important, vital, crucial for our dissertations, for our thesis. So ma'am, with these words, I again welcome you, and please continue ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good,
Dr. Rakesh, and thank
good
you for
afternoon,
such a
ma'am,
generous
and
introduction.
welcome.
Good afternoon, Dr. Pathan, and good afternoon, Dr. Tariq. Thank you for inviting me for this session. Um, I can see Dr. Preeti also is here. She's the program leader for PhD for the School of Law. And I'm very happy to see the participants. I'm not sure how many participants exactly are there for this FDP. But before I start, it would be helpful if I get to know of a little background of the kind of people that are attending this FDP, because I will then be able to set the tone accordingly.
Very good afternoon, ma'am. This is Dr. Aditi. The participants, they are LLM, they are LLM students, PhD scholars, and the assistant professor, associate professors who are teaching law in different universities. Not only from law field, there are teachers who are from different schools like agriculture, engineering, and other departments which are there, not only in GT Goenka, but also from all over India.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, as per my understanding, majority of the participants are from School of Law, either pursuing their MPhil or their masters or their PhD, or are teaching law. and there are some faculty from other schools as well. So we have a good mix of people. So great. So I will probably structure the session accordingly. Some of you are people who already are experienced in doing a lot of research, and some of you would now be moving towards doing your research in a more structured format. But we keep hearing of this word very often. There's a lot of emphasis in the new education policy also on research. Universities are also investing heavily in research. In fact, the Prime Minister of India has been speaking about investments, large scale investments in research and development. The world during this pandemic has understood the importance of research. In fact, in our country, we've been one of the first countries in the world that has come up with the vaccine for COVID. And right now, we are all protected because of that particular vaccine, which we've not just used in our own country, but supplied it to so many other countries. And this has been because of investments and beliefs in the kind of research that is happening in our country. So let us start with that. So if we are doing research in the field of law, so and I would like this to be an engaging session where it's not just one way communication. I will be sharing my screen and I will be showing a presentation, but I would also like to interact with the participants, because that's the only way that I can verify if what I'm saying is being understood or not, because all that I see on my screen are black tiles. So I don't really know if anything is being understood or not. So I would first like to hear from the participants about the various research areas that either they already are undertaking research on or they've heard of research happening in those areas. And we can start with anybody who would like to go first. I can see a hand by Jagriti Khanna. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Jagriti Khanna. I am presently working as an assistant professor in IT University College, Geetharathan, and also I am pursuing my PhD from GDGU itself, and my research thesis is on a functional critique of cybercrimes against women. So
Okay.
in India, so I am targeting that area, and my research is revolving around all the cyber crime laws that we are presently having and the provisions that are there. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. That's a very interesting area of research. Yes. Okay. Swarnendu Roy.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Swarnendu and I am doing my research on use of AI by the Chinese, ma'am, with GD Goenka University only from School of Management. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. All right. And some of you I see are PhD scholars of our university. So, uh, some of the things that you will hear in the session today would be some of the things that you've already heard from me in the orientation session that you would have had during your PhD, because it's very, very important before understanding how to structure your research to understand the fundamentals of research. Yes, Zikra
I
Jabi.
think, ma'am, there are a lot of queries. So because we will be having question answer session also in the last. So I think we will take up all these queries in the last. So I don't know
Sure,
if
we take
you.
up queries. Yes, we will have time for queries.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, Zikra Jabin. Zikra Jabin, can you hear me? Okay, fine. So can you please put your hand down in case you do not want to speak? Okay. So when you think of various research topics in the field of law, you will realize that most of the research topics are focused around either descriptive sort of research or explanatory sort of research. In the field of law, particularly, because you're not really doing any experimentation, you are studying social phenomena that already exists, you're studying laws that already exist, You are doing a secondary research most of the time, coupled with certain other methods that would probably lead to either editing or proposal for editing or changes in the existing laws, or your commentary on the possibilities of amendments in the existing laws. So, most of the research would be around suggestions, around your observations, around your interpretation, and there will be very little research that will happen at the experimental level, particularly in the field of law. So, I will now share my screen, and I will not be able to, if I share my screen, I will not be able to see the screen over here that's right now in front of me. So, in case you have any questions, you will have to wait for me to unshare my screen, and only then I'll be able to see you. Or if there is anybody who has any questions while I'm speaking, you will have to unmute yourself and speak. Otherwise, I'll not be able to see you. Okay. So, I'll just share my screen now. Okay, I hope you can see the first slide on the screen.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Okay,
It is visible.
all right. So let us first begin with the most important question, something that we're all here to answer today, which is what is research? Because we may make a lot of effort to structure what we are trying to find out in a scientific manner so that it can get across to a wider population and accepted globally. But do we understand research correctly? So, would anybody like to tell me what do they think is research? We have a lot of these tools on our phones now through which we can, at the click of a button, Google search a lot of things. But are we doing any research when we are doing a Google search or using any other app for any search like that? Any one person can respond, please.
No, ma'am, that's just a collection of information when we're doing a Google search.
Okay. All right. So essentially, when we are doing research, uh, it is very, very important that whatever information that we are searching is done in a systematic manner to find out more about things we either did not know, and also about things that no one else knew either. So, in a way, it would be advancing frontiers of knowledge. So, research essentially does not always mean that you come up with innovations, or if you're trying to find out more about things that are already known to mankind, it does not qualify as research. That's not the case. Whenever you're doing a systematic investigation about things that you already knew and things that you did not know and no one else knew either, would qualify to be research. And what you're doing is, by establishing these facts, by study of these existing material, what you're doing is you're helping people reach new conclusions. And it is very, very important that for it to be um, less and less questionable, less and less subjective, your research is scientifically structured. Now, how would your research be scientifically structured? I did see that there are a couple of faculty from the School of Engineering and Sciences also. So it's very important for us to understand that research across all areas would be objective only if it is scientifically structured. It doesn't have to be only research in the engineering and sciences or in the pure sciences. It has to be objective across domains, and the methods of doing research remain more or less similar across the various domains, whichever domain that we are doing our research in. The way our research is structured, our methodologies, all of those would remain similar. The only thing that will change with our domain would be the research designs, which is how we go about doing our research. So, for any research to be scientific, it has to meet certain criteria. Those criteria essentially are that your research has to be observable, reliable, verifiable, and replicable. And replicable means that it reduces researcher bias, which means that on being tested and retested over and over again, it yields the same results. But this holds true more for experimental research. And what we are today trying to understand is, how do you plan a systematic research based on your research philosophies? Because it's very important for us to understand that no research is independent of the researcher. There is a researcher that is required to do research. Therefore, any research that a researcher undertakes will be governed by the thought process of the researcher. It does not happen in isolation. Anywhere a human element is involved, anywhere human intervention is involved, unless a robot is doing something that has been programmed into the robot, which also is programmed by humans. So the programming will also be dependent on our theoretical interpretations and beliefs. So all of these are going to affect how we structure our research. And nobody is going to tell us how our own thinking will help our research outcomes, possibly. And therefore, then where does the question of an objective research go? Where does our research become scientific if there is so much of human intervention, scope for human dependence, scope for influence of our thought on the others, and so on? An example would be, and this particularly would be understood by students from the School of Law. Now, if I ask you a question, and you may have probably heard of this question in the past as well, because this was asked by a very well known philosopher. This was an example given in one of the lectures. So I will just ask you that question, and because I need to see your reaction for this, I will unshare my screen. So the question is, if there is somebody driving on a road, and that road goes and leads and ends at a T point, and the person is driving the car very fast, and suddenly the brakes fail. On both sides of the car there are pavements. On one side of the pavement, 2 people are sleeping. On the other side of the pavement, 20 people are sleeping. This person has no way to stop the car. So this person has 3 options for stopping the car. First option is that he goes and bangs the car against the wall, which is where the T point is. That's one way of stopping the car. Second way of stopping the car would be goes onto the left pavement where 2 people are sleeping. So 2 people die. Third option is goes to the right side where 20 people are sleeping. So 20 people may die. So which of these is the correct option? What should you do?
Ma'am, the first option would be applicable, I guess.
Okay. Any other points of view?
Ma'am,
The
the
provision is
question here will be,
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, sir, continue.
ma'am, the dilemma here is self-damage, reduced collateral damage, or maximum collateral damage. Okay, so now it depends on the psyche of the individual, that whether he is ready to take on a damage on himself, or he goes for a minimum collateral damage. That is, either he goes on straight, or he takes on those two people who are there on the pavement. Now, these are the two different thought process that could be there, in my view, and based on his own psyche, he will have to take this on. Thank you so much.
Okay. So we have 2 votes for the first option. Any other vote for any other option?
First option only.
Okay. So most of the people,
First option.
okay, opt for smaller evil. Now that's interesting. So smaller evil could also be 2 people. Yeah. But again, this is a matter of,
Ma'am, human life lost could cost more than the metal cost.
no, but human life would be lost even in the first option, because he will
But
himself
that
die.
would be his discretionary option instead of claiming some other person's life. So that would be his own personal like decision and discretion.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm so glad that this discussion has started, because this means that we are inching towards the definition of justice. So what is justice? How do we define what is justice? Killing oneself, is that justice? Killing 2 people, is that justice? Killing 20 people, is that justice? So how do we define, or how do we decide what is a lesser evil, as somebody said? What is justice? What is ethical? What is unethical? And this is where laws come in, because laws give us guidelines as to what is ethical and permitted as per guidelines, whichever is a lesser evil, and of course the associated punishments. Now, did these definitions which laws give us ethical guidelines and associated punishments, as I said. So where did all of these come from? These, of course, have come from people like you and me. These have come from the society. And where have people like you and me brought all of these beliefs about ethics and values and justice and laws and all of that? Where has all of this come from? It's very important to understand that all of this has come from our philosophical understanding, our belief systems. So we are the ones that decide or govern things like what is universally acceptable, what is universally unacceptable. Is killing oneself a lesser evil than killing others? Now, there could be several interpretations. There'll be some people who will say the lives of 2 people on the pavement may not be as precious as the life of this one person on whom maybe several families are dependent. So there can be various arguments. There can be various points of views, but these are all subjective. There is no universally accepted right thing to do in situations like these. So here come human differences. So our philosophical understandings, if they govern our philosophical beliefs, how can they not govern our research interpretations? Because the laws of the country, the laws everywhere, the norms of social existence, all of these are outcomes of social prescriptions. And social prescriptions come from years of observation, amendments, and further study. So it's very important to understand how our own philosophical beliefs will affect our understanding of how we will do our research. I'll share my screen again. Okay. So once we acquire new knowledge through our research, what do we do with our new knowledge? In order for it to make some scientific sense, it has to be categorized, described, explained, evaluated, compared, correlated. We need to be able to predict with that information, and in certain circumstances, also control with this new knowledge. And once we are able to do all of this, we are able to attain scientific knowledge. So when we are doing research, we are essentially acquiring knowledge and developing an understanding by collecting facts, interpreting them to build up a picture of the world around us and even within us. Within us would refer to the kind of research that happens in the social sciences, because there's a lot of research that is happening on emotions, how humans interact. For example, during the pandemic, there is a lot of research happening on anxiety, on how the pandemic is affecting anxiety in individuals. Therefore, your research and the way you carry it out is deeply influenced by the theory or philosophy that underpins it. Your understanding of any situation cannot be independent of your belief system. And there are different ways about doing research depending on how you believe reality exists. Now, there are various ways of looking at what is reality, how does reality exist, and so on. So, metaphysical plane or metaphysical ways in which you could look at things would be areas where you're questioning beliefs, like things that are beyond the physical, beyond things that can be touched, felt, and experienced. So questions like what is knowledge, what are things, what is time and space. And over here also you have two extremes to metaphysics. On one extreme, you have this belief of idealism, where it is understood that everything is changing based on our experiences. And the example is sound. So sound is not just sound waves according to idealism, it is an emotional experience. And the other extreme is materialism or reductionism. And that includes things to only physical beings. And our consciousness, our mind, really does not change anything which is happening out there. So social actions, our mental beliefs will really not make any difference to how things are understood. And according to materialism, music would be just vibrations in the air. So here again, there can be a lot of controversy, but your approach to how you will structure your research will depend on how you understand reality. Do you feel that sound is nothing but sound waves? Or do you feel that music is not just sound? It is an emotional experience. So the research that you do in that area will be governed by your theoretical understanding, your philosophical belief. We know that epistemology is a theory of knowledge, and it is concerned with the reliability of our senses and the power of our mind. It's very important that we understand that when we are doing research, we are acquiring new knowledge, and there are two basic methods for acquiring this knowledge. So these could be done either inductively or deductively. Inductive reasoning, or empiricism as we call it, is knowledge gained by sensory experience. And for here you will see it is from specific to general. An example would be, all giraffes that I have seen have very long necks. Therefore, all giraffes will have long necks. And deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning would be where you start with, I'm sorry, did I say the other way around? In inductive, it is specific to general, and in deductive, it is general to specific. So in deduction, the example would be, all living things will eventually die. This particular animal is a living thing. Therefore, this animal will eventually die. So whatever knowledge that you gain, whatever knowledge that you acquire, which means that whatever kind of research that you're doing, the information that you will collect, the knowledge that you will collect will be either using inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning. See, the overall structure of any dissertation, for example, or a PhD thesis, or any other document of research will remain more or less the same. That you start with a research question, then I'm going to talk about that later, but then you start doing your literature review, then you identify gaps, from there come your research questions, your research objectives, then you decide what is your methodology, what your research design is going to be like, and then from that you draw your results, and you discuss your results and reach your conclusions. So overall structure will remain the same, but within that, how are you going to structure your research and what your outcomes are going to be will be dependent on the way in which you approach your research. It is about the how of doing your research. But how, a lot of people will tell you. Why, very few people will tell you. So today we will also try and understand the why bit. Any inquiry that we do for a purpose of research is guided by the theory which precedes the inquiry, and therefore you're also required in your thesis to identify the theoretical framework based on which you are going to perform either your experiment or your secondary research, or whichever method that you're choosing. It's important that you identify a theoretical framework, because that gives you a frame of reference. So it becomes all the more important for us to understand what are theories. So theories are speculative answers to perceived problems and tested by observation and experiment. Why speculative answers to a perceived problem? Because you see a problem, you look at the possible solutions and speculate that these could be the answers. Now, through your various experiments, you reach the most appropriate answer. But is the most appropriate answer the only answer? Not always. But it may be the most often received answer. And therefore, one very important aspect of theory which leads to a hypothesis is that it is falsifiable. Because if a theory can no longer be tested, or if a theory can no longer give different results, then it becomes law. Right? But till that point, it remains a theory. And in that way, science also through trial and error, presents various theories and hypotheses that are tested, and the fittest theory at the end survives. And if you have to test a theory, it must be expressed in the form of a hypothesis. So a hypothesis, in other words, would also be an assumed conclusion. Therefore, the essential nature of hypothesis also becomes that it is falsifiable, which means that there is a possibility of accepting it as well as rejecting it. So you're testing it, you're not necessarily assuming that it will only be accepted. There is always scope for falsifiability. So scientific method, as we understand it, and some people will have reservations when we call it a trial and error method, is also known as hypothetico-deductive method, which means a combination of inductive and deductive reasoning, where you're moving to and fro from identification of a problem to developing a hypothesis through observations, charting implications by deduction, testing various hypotheses, and finally accepting or rejecting a hypothesis, and then, if required, refining it if the results suggest so. And that is how most of experimental research happens. Therefore, it is this combination of experience with deductive and inductive reasoning which is the foundation of modern scientific research and is referred to as scientific method, where you are testing and retesting unless you reach a conclusion that is more or less acceptable in most of the situations. Therefore, the element of replicability sets in. And that is how it becomes scientific. Now, there are certain assumptions of the scientific method. For us to be able to do any kind of scientific research, there are certain assumptions without which, as a researcher, we cannot move forward. So the first assumption is that our universe has an order. And as a researcher, we are only trying to investigate or understand the rules around that order. Example, every morning the sun will come up at a particular time. Suddenly, if one day the sun does not come up at that particular time, you feel unrest. You are thrown out of gear because something new has happened. So order has been broken. So without the assumption of order, scientific method will become very difficult. The other assumption is external reality, which means that we all share the same external reality. And if you were to look at this from the point of legal research, please apply these to social order, and you will understand how this makes sense. You will assume that the reality will remain the same for everyone. If the temperature, for example, is 24 degrees outside, almost everyone that is exposed to this temperature of 24 degrees will more or less react in a similar manner. If there is somebody who's going to take out 2 jackets and wear 2 jackets in 24 degrees temperature, that person is going to be labeled as abnormal. Why abnormal? Because that is against the norm. So external reality does not depend on us. More or less, will react in similar manners, will share similar knowledge, will equally contribute to development of a world outside. Reliability is the next assumption, which means we rely on our senses and reasoning to produce facts and reliably interpret reality. Parsimony, again, is a very, very important element of scientific method. Some people believe that the more complicated the explanation, the more complicated the language, the better our research paper is. No, that's not the case. The simpler the explanation, the better. In fact, theories should be refined to the most compact formulation. And that is when they will have the maximum impact, because they'll be understood by majority. The point of research is to take your research out to the maximum people for them to benefit. If you keep your research in a box and not share it with anyone, it'll be of no use to even you. Generality, which means the rules of reality discovered through research can be applied in all relevant situations, regardless of time and practice. And there is no right or wrong way to conduct your research. There are certain methods that will have better and more efficient results. Some will not. But when you're doing your research with human participants or animals also, there are certain ethical issues come up about the way you treat them. So there are two aspects of ethical research. One would be individuals, which means your own values as a researcher and how they relate to your own approaches to doing your research. And the second would be how during the course of your research you treat the others. So there'll be issues around consent, confidentiality, anonymity, courtesy, plagiarism, informed consent, how you represent data, how you store and transmit data, and so on. Now, specifically when we come to legal research, it may be very helpful that before you set out to make a research plan, you first understand through a self-assessment what your topic is. Is it close enough to your ideologies as a researcher? Is it going to further strengthen your beliefs about certain certain philosophies or certain theories? Then you move towards identifying the problem that you would like to do your research on and untangle it by breaking it into smaller parts. Because we may want to do research on n number of things, but it may not always be possible for us to do our research within the limited time frame with the limited number of resources that we have. So therefore, it becomes very important for us to choose a problem that is doable in the form of a research project. Next logical step would be identifying knowledge gaps, drafting your plan, which means if you're trying to study a particular law, then finding the relevant laws associated with it, maybe in other countries, and so on. If it requires some bit of restating, refining, updating, verifying, you do that. So all of this would then lead you to your scientific secondary research. Now, once you've done all of this, once you've done your analysis, at times we get stuck and go into a loop where it comes to understanding where to stop, because we get so attached to our research that we do not know where to stop. So a good way of understanding where to stop would be where you feel that you've reached theoretical saturation. Theoretical saturation would essentially mean where you are no longer finding anything new. So whatever you are reading thereafter is only a repetition of what you've already read in the past several times. So that would qualify as theoretical saturation. Now, when you're doing research, particularly in law, is it possible to do any kind of research that is independent of your philosophical orientation? I'm asking you a couple of questions. So, is it possible to do any research which is beyond or unattached to your philosophical orientation? Can you do unbiased research? Can you do research which is not influenced by your cultural beliefs? Is it possible to do research like that?
No, ma'am.
Okay, but then how do you then make your scientific research scientific? How does it become scientific then?
We applied some test.
You apply some test. Okay, what test will you apply? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, ma'am, there are t-test.
T-test on what? T-test on the data that you will collect?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that enough to make it scientific?
Not at all, ma'am.
Then how do you make it scientific?
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Ma'am, uh, if we conduct any research, there is chances that our personal biasness will come into picture. But then the entire purpose of research is to give unbiased opinion on something. So if even if I'm forming an assumption, or let's say I'm drafting a hypothesis, but at last, after even also having certain personal biasness, at last I have to give a critical examination to the topic or to the assumption that I'm working for, and that is only going to this is the only way I'm going to complete the piece, and it is going to be called as complete research. So I have to be critically examining the thing and assumption that I'm working on. So
Okay.
critical appraisal of the opinion or of the assumption is important. For example, let's say I'm very much tilted towards intersectional feminism, the idea that Kimberly Crenshaw coined.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are certain limitations
Hmm.
that she has not figured out in her work. So even if I'm personally biased towards the opinion of intersectional feminism, I need to work on it and give certain thing at last that these were the shortcomings in the work done by Kimberly Crenshaw, and that could be done further. So this way, I'm also giving scope for the future research.
But that is your interpretation. Somebody may disagree. Somebody may not agree with your
Yes,
assessment.
yes, ma'am. Agree, ma'am.
Ma'am, my suggestion is different on that part because in the legal research now we are bound by some legal aspects and some constitution binding on that part. We can do the research and we can make the finding on critically review and certain data analysis only, but to make them implement for the benefit of the society, we need to go through the legality process only.
So no. So we did. If you remember, remember going back to the question that I asked you about the driver. Now, from that
Yeah,
we've understood that
Bulfesha,
laws.
I think Bulfesha has some answer to
Yes,
this.
but let me first answer what Mr. Sharma has just said. So, if we go back to the same example of the driver, from that we have understood that laws are defined by the society to give us um, guidelines as to what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, right? So that will only give you guidelines as to what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and what are the associated punishments. But does that make it scientific?
Ma'am, it can be scientific, but because if I'm talking about only context of law, legal parts of the research. So my
Yes.
specific reply about that legal part of the research, because everything which are bind by constitution and law for that part, guidelines to be there, bare acts to be there. If anything we want to do, we need to follow that thumb rule only.
But here again, you're not talking about the process. You're only talking about the guidelines.
Yes, because
Ma'am, may I say
process.
something?
Let me first give a chance to Ananya. The hand has been raised, and then we'll come back to you.
Ma'am, see, ma'am, legal research cannot be biased because see,
the entire legal system is based on justice, equity, and good conscience. So whatever it's my perspective, whatever it's my prejudice, whatever I'm having that understanding, I should do it with an open mind. That should be the researcher who is doing a legal research. That should be the aim and objective. And the legal research should be based on the data and response of the public for whom the law has been made, and on their basis of their response and whether that law is a welfare law or not. After understanding each and everything, after understanding the data, after collecting the response of the public, we should interpret that particular. It could be scientific.
Okay, so you're saying that any research that is based on data is a good way of making it scientific. Is that what you're saying?
Ma'am, obviously we have to do the interpretation of the data, whatever the data we are collecting, and how we are collecting the data. That's an important thing. The way of collecting the data, it's a questionable thing. Whether if we are collecting the data in a very random and haphazard way, that can't be scientific. So the way of opting that particular data should be very clear. That should be very scientific and systematic.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Going back to the recent farm laws that were repealed.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the farm laws that were first approved and implemented, they were done following the processes of the constitution laid out in the constitution of approval of a bill and then becoming a law and all of that, right?
Ma'am, no, again, if you will see the entire process, it was totally unconstitutional. The way the bill was
Let me
passed.
complete my question. I'm not talking about the process of making the law.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the population that it focused. So now if you take that particular law to a certain segment of the population, let's say the farmers, right?
Yes.
So
correct.
they will obviously say that no, it is unconstitutional, it is not relevant, therefore it is not correct and not relevant for us. It is not beneficial for us, right?
True, ma'am.
If you
Yeah.
take the same set of laws to the ruling party and the members of the ruling party, their opinions, if you're collecting opinions on the laws, for example, okay, now their opinions on the laws will most probably be very different from that of the farmers. So that's
True.
one set of data. Another set of data would be the data that you receive from farmers. The third set of data probably could be from the opposition party members.
Yeah.
If you ask for their opinion. So now you have 3 sets of data on the same set of laws. Okay. So which of these is most reliable?
So, ma'am, see, right, I will give you an example right now how they are collecting the data. Right now, the marriageable age of girl has been raised to 21.
No. Come back to this example. Which
Ma'am,
of these
see,
data is most reliable?
Ma'am, see that the way they have collected the data, they have said that they have taken the opinion of the farmer. Now, if you will ask them the statistics,
Precisely, you have hit the nail on the head. Now, whether that data is scientific or not is going to be governed by the intention of collection.
Yeah, very true.
Ma'am, it depends on the authenticity of the data. Ma'am, it depends on the authenticity of the data.
Sorry?
It's depend on the authenticity of the data.
How do you establish authenticity? That's another debate. So we'll not get into that right now. We'll require another FDP on authenticity of data. But the intention, the sample size, the method, the time of collection of data, who is collecting the data, is the population being represented appropriately or not by the sample that has filled up the data? What is the questionnaire like? All of these things will together determine whether the data is scientific or not.
Yeah, very true.
Okay.
Ma'am, can we put this null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis in this whole farmers issue? Whether can we say that this is yes, disproved because there is no cause and effect in the enactment of this new act, or can we say that yes, it is proved, it is alternative hypothesis, yes, there is a cause and effect in this if we bring this new laws? And then if we are going for sample survey, then definitely our respondents are most of the respondents are from farmer society or they are farmer. So can then we say that this is like we are having a scientific study and then can we go for this? This is a
No,
little
so
bit
for this,
confusion in
no,
my
so
mind.
for a study on this particular issue, if you have to do a study which is appropriately representing all points of view, then you will have to take opinions of the farmer representatives, you will have to take opinion of the opposition representatives, you will have to take opinion of the people in power, you may also have to take opinion of legal luminaries. So there will be various points of view. So whether your research on this particular area is scientific or not, whether you are doing the research which is secondary or primary, because you will have hypothesis if you are doing primary research. So if you're collecting data, laying out a hypothesis, then the authenticity of your research, the scientific nature of your research will depend on a combination of all of these factors. It will not only be resting and dependent on the law as such or your opinion as a researcher. So your opinion as a researcher will govern how you are going to collect your data also. And therefore, no research can be minus the researcher bias. But it becomes very, very important as researchers for us to understand how our bias is affecting our research and to minimize the researcher bias. We cannot completely do away with the bias ever, but the intention is to minimize the researcher bias so that our research becomes scientific in nature. And what is a typical formula for data being a good representation of the population? How many people should you collect your data from? If data is what you're saying is going to define your research as scientific. Usually in large population sizes, it is believed that 10% of the population would be a good representation of the entire population, right? Otherwise, you follow formulas to calculate what is a good representation of the population. But overall, if you see, if you have large population sizes, then 10 or over would be a good representation of the population. But then again, there can be several issues of how do you identify this 10%? How have you chosen? What has been your sampling technique? And so on. Therefore, as a researcher, you must be extremely conscious and aware of your bias as a researcher affecting collection of data, because at times when we lay out hypothesis, as Dr. Rakesh said, we become too attached to structure our research designed to prove the hypothesis. So as a researcher, if that is the intention, if that is the direction in which we are moving, we are not really doing a good scientific inquiry, because we are ruling out the possibility of falsifiability. We are only structuring our research so that it becomes accepted.
So,
I
ma'am,
need to go back to now Mr. Swarnendu and Bhavna, because they also had certain points to make.
ma'am, one thing. So, what
Yeah.
should be the size of the sample? For example, if I'm doing research on triple divorce law, so what should be the size of sample? And
So yes, so as I said, a good representation would be 10 or more percentage of the total population. That is a good size. But then there are certain formulas also. If the population size is not available, then there are certain formulas also available which you need to apply to be able to properly and appropriately represent your population. Okay.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mr. Swarnendu and Bhavna, do you have anything to say, or we can move on?
Yes, ma'am. Just a small submission here.
Yes.
As per my limited understanding, ma'am, it is like a triangle wherein you have the research questions, you have the method, and you have the data. And in the center of this triangle is where the researcher is standing, ma'am. And therefore, yes, the bias will be there, because this bias has researchers bias, or the researcher's thought process has only led him to take on this subject of
Absolutely.
research, would have made him to think that there has to be something new, or something in a newer way that has to come out in this research. So to make it scientific, basically two things, ma'am. The method has to be very proven, very standard, and has to be gone through the academic rigor that they say, and therefore coming on to the data, which will then be accepted by all, and then the research may be termed as a successful research. That is what I had to submit, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely correct. And that is why it's very important to understand that we as researchers cannot ever aim to do a completely unbiased research, but we must become aware of our biases. And our endeavor should be to minimize those biases consciously by following standard procedures which are accepted by the researcher community. Yes, Bhavna Sarkar?
Yeah, sorry, ma'am. I may sound bit like inappropriate, or I'm too naive to comment, but still, ma'am, whatever information, whatever knowledge I have gathered so far with my PhD tenure is like, you may go to any extent as far as scientific method is concerned under the sun. You have everything to inquire and seek knowledge about, but in the limited capacity, and if I may conclude, it would be like, you should not bar the or hamper the ethical standards of any sort of knowledge or research information you have with, be it with the already existing data, or be the kind of a data that we are going for our particular topic of research. This would be,
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you.
yeah, thank you, ma'am. This was only the thing I would like to mention.
Yeah. And
Thank
the last comment that we'll take before moving forward would be from Mayuri Rakwanshi. I see a hand
Thank
up.
you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is with respect to sample size. When we are discussing about sample size, why is it possible to have a sample size in terms of a non-living entity? For example, when if I am doing a research, is it possible that I identify judgments of a particular court as a sample size? So why do we always look at when we are trying to look at sample size, we are always identifying living. I mean, we are trying to look at human inputs. In the sense that there could be a possibility where I'm trying to develop a hypothesis, and maybe the questionnaire or the interviews which I'm taking from the people ultimately would then induce a bias in the data, because they would be giving their opinions, their perspective, whereas I am trying to empirically make an assessment. So how do I resolve that conflict, and
Okay.
where
So,
does this
yes.
also
So,
come?
in fact, you brought up a very important point, in fact, which is the direction in which we are now moving, which is research designs. So, what we are talking about right now is only one method, which is quantitative data collection. There are several other methods. There are research designs. You could also do your entire PhD research by on only one case study. So it depends on the nature of your research, the research design that you choose for yourself, and how do you go about validating your findings. So that is the direction in which we are now going to move. So please, it's very important for everyone to understand that up until now, we were only talking about how is it that you come up with a research problem which governs the direction in which your research is going to go. And then you reach a point where you decide, okay, now that I know that I want to do my research on this particular area, how do I do my research?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes, Zikra Jabeen, although we do not have time, but quickly, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I want to ask if I am personally attached with some subject of research, is my research will be called by, like, since childhood I'm seeing problems faced by disabled people, because obviously I will put my thoughts in research. Will it be called biased or Untitled.
If you're attached with a particular research topic and you are directing all the methods and your data collection techniques to prove a hypothesis that you already believe in, then you're biased. But if you're attached to a particular topic and you are doing your research in a scientific manner in that topic, then you will not be called biased by a scientific community. But as a researcher, we know that there can be no research without a researcher bias. Right?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. And the effort should be to only minimize the bias. Yeah. Okay. I'll share my screen again quickly. Please put your hand down. Otherwise, we'll keep seeing it here. Okay. So once you have the new knowledge, as I said, you categorize it, describe it, explain it, evaluate it, compare it, correlate it, predict, and maybe even control through your new knowledge. And this, what you see on your screen, would be the process of how you move from identifying a problem area to actually disseminating your research results. So you investigate the problem, write the process to explain the research, gain up ethical approvals that are required, carry out background research, explore the various methods of data collection, carry out detailed research, data collection analysis, and then you do your research analysis and finally disseminate. And there are several loops that come in between this entire process because, of course, your research is backed by a theoretical background. There are ethical concerns that come up. There are research gaps that you identify when you do your secondary research in the form of literature review and so on. So this is how you complete the entire cycle of doing your research and finally disseminating it. What you see on your screen right now is something that is called the research onion, which tells you how layer by layer, from the approach that governs your thought, does your methodology come from there, the methods that you will do for your research will come, which will then affect the way you collect your data and how you will do your research, and finally how will you analyze the findings of your research. So it's all interlinked. It's like an onion, and the more you keep peeling layers, the deeper and deeper you go. The research problem, as I said, is where you start with, which will lead you to what are you going to do, why you're doing your research, how are you going to do it, and when are you going to complete your research and report the results. And therefore, it is very important that your research problem is stated clearly and concisely, is significant, is not trivial or repetition of previous work, is delineated, which means in order to limit its scope to practical investigation, it's possible to attain information required for the problem, which means that it should be doable in the form of research, and it is possible to draw conclusions related to the problem, as the point of research is to find some answers. That's very important, that you're doing this research to find some answers. So if your research problem is directed to a problem that has no answers in the present context, it may not be feasible in today's time to do your research in that particular area. Does not mean that in the future there are going to be no opportunities for research in that area, but in the present time, for the purpose of your present research project, this may not be appropriate. Therefore, you must choose a research problem which is doable. Now, philosophy. I've been saying that your research philosophy governs your thoughts, which governs the area in which you will do research and how you will do research. So philosophy, if we try and understand the textbook definition of philosophy, so it essentially means love of wisdom, which essentially means in order to acquire wisdom, you will ask a lot of questions. So where you keep asking questions and try and understand how things work, what are fundamental truths, which is the kind of world we live in, what are relationships, how do they exist, uh, and so on, can only be done through asking questions and seeking answers. So, your research philosophy will govern the way you ask questions and the direction in which you ask questions, which can be understood with the way you understand the world. Let's briefly try and understand how your philosophy is going to affect your research philosophy. Now, it's very important to understand ontology. Ontology is your belief in the permanence of things. So, the way you believe things exist will govern the way you ask questions. Going back to the, I think, example somebody just had mentioned about the marriageable age of women. The way you do your research in that particular area will depend on your beliefs, right? And that will further determine how you are going to collect your data. Now, there are various aspects of philosophy like positivism, realism, interpretivism, axiology. So that will probably mean how you're going to collect your data. And as Mr. Raghuvanshi asked, why do we need large data sets? Why do we need human participants? Why can't we not take data from anywhere else? Will all depend on how you see the world. If you are a positivist, you will only take up research methods that natural scientists take up. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. If realism is what your philosophy is, then your research methods will focus on critical analysis, as somebody just mentioned, secondary review of literature, on understanding how things exist. Are they independent of the human experience? Do things exist in isolation, and so on? If your approach is interpretivist, then as a researcher, you will try and understand the social problems through the point of a social actor. So you are essentially not going to make any changes to what is happening around you. You will participate in it, or you will observe it from a distance, and so on. So just quickly to take you through this. So for example, if you're a positivist, you will use methods like quantitative techniques. You will formally build an explanatory theory. And if you are a realist, then again, you will see whether whatever truth exists out there, it is existing independent of the individual human mind, or is a creation of the human mind. So here again, it will depend on whether you believe in realism or critical realism. And interpretivist, as I said, you will only from a distance observe what people are doing. And here you could probably adapt methods like, which are secondary in nature, or you could do grounded theory, or you could do a case study analysis, because what you're trying to do is understand norms, rules, values, beliefs, and so on. So you're only doing a understanding of the various ways in which society exists and operates. You're not essentially trying to change anything. You're only trying to interpret reality as it exists in the people around you. Pragmatism, again, would be how scientifically, positively, what is most relevant in the times today. Axiology would be where, a belief that your own values play in all stages of the research great importance and will govern which axis do you take. Are you going to remain a positivist and do only data-based research, or you're going to be an interpretivist and do only experience-based research, or you are going to do a mix of both? At times, I have that figure later. At times, people also adopt a mixed approach where you're following mixed methods depending on the kind of research that you have embarked upon to do. So, the research paradigms would again be dependent on your beliefs of how reality exists, and therefore you will choose the method that would most appropriately align with your style of thinking. So for example, if you've taken a research approach of deduction, now there you have 5 sequential stages of testing theory. So you deduce a hypothesis, express the hypothesis operationally, test the hypothesis, examine the specific outcome of the hypothesis, and if required, you modify the theory. Now, when you're doing this, at times you may find that the nature of your research is such, as I said earlier, that you may need to adapt a mixture of various methods. So you may do a quasi-quantitative, quasi-qualitative method, or combination of both in such a manner that you are able to collect data as well, plus do focus group interviews, or maybe a case analysis and so on. So all of this will, the method that you will choose will depend on the nature of your research topic, the time that is available with you for your research, the population that you're trying to study. What kind of a study is this? Is this a cross-sectional study? Is it a longitudinal study? What is the extent of risk of your study? If you're doing an experiment, what is the extent of risk? If it's a social experiment, what would be the extent of risk? If it is a law that you're coming up with, proposing, what is the element of risk over there? And who is your audience? Now, why you're doing research will also govern how you will do research. Are you doing your research because it is a sponsored research? And in most of the cases, sponsored research, particularly sponsored by corporates, it is expected to yield results which are going to favor the corporates. So therefore, again, the method that you will choose will depend on the intention with which you are doing your research. So the process of research design, which is absolutely essential, is dependent on the research choices, the strategies that you adopt, and the time horizons. Time horizons would mean, is it research that is longitudinal? Is it cross-sectional? Are you going to collect data from a particular geographical location at a particular point of time? Therefore, research design will need clear objectives that need to be derived from the research question. And you need to specify the source of data collection, think of the ethical constraints, and so on. So there are various kinds of researches, like there is exploratory research where you're doing research through secondary research, like discussions with qualitative discussions with consumers, where you're doing focus groups, where you're doing case studies, in-depth interviews with limited number of people. All of this would qualify as exploratory research. Explanatory, again associated with exploratory, would focus on explaining how phenomena happen. So it's could be dependent on either interviews of experts in the subject, conducting focus group interviews, or could be based on a literature review that you do. There are descriptive studies also, where you describe through naturalistic observation, or through surveys, or through archival research, or through longitudinal research, how phenomena happens. And you may also at times try and correlate how certain phenomena are happening. So all of this would qualify as descriptive research. And I said, most of the research that will happen in legal studies would be either exploratory or descriptive. Explanatory is where, again, you're trying to explain certain phenomena through research methods by identifying variables and how one variable has a bearing on the other. Therefore, your research strategies will be dependent on the various designs that you identify, the research design that you choose for yourself, specific research design, and that will govern your research strategy. So if it's an experiment, you will have variables that will have a bearing on each other, and then you will study the effect of variable A on variable B, which means an independent variable, dependent variable. You measure the variables, control some variables, and then of course through method of sample collection from a population, you get your data, which you later analyze and interpret your result on. Survey could be again from the population that you choose, case study, or you're doing action research, or you're doing grounded theory, ethnographic research, archival research, or doctrinal method of research that you're choosing. All of these will depend on your research design. Therefore, research design is the backbone of your entire research project. And when you're doing and choosing your research design, the role of the practitioner researcher becomes extremely essential, because you will decide where do you collect the data from, who are you going to collect the data from, what time duration are you going to take to collect the data, do you have access to the areas where you want to collect your data or not, are you aware of your own assumptions and preconceptions and how they're going to affect your outcomes and findings. So you are playing a very, very, very crucial role in collecting your data and defining your research strategy. And this is the table that I was talking about, the figure that I was talking about. So this is where you may either choose one research method or multiple research methods, mono method or multiple research methods. So that will again depend on what is the intention of your research. So multiple research methods could be, either used for triangulation, where you're doing a literature review, interviews with certain specialists, and also a survey. You could also use multiple research methods to facilitate research in a particular area, and so on. So there are multiple reasons why you may choose multiple research methods. But if you're doing your PhD level research, for example, or a master's dissertation, it is simpler, for the purpose of completing your research within a stipulated duration, to do quantitative analysis as far as possible. For masters, if you're doing qualitative analysis, you limit yourself to only one method of qualitative analysis. If you're doing mixed methods, please ensure that the sample size that you're choosing for your mixed method is not too cumbersome for you to collect data from, because if you do that, then you will get lost and you will not be able to complete your research well in time. It's very important, therefore, you choose the appropriate time horizon for your research. And of course, we do understand that the credibility of your research findings will depend on the reliability, validity, generalizability, and logical leaps and false assumptions of your research. And as I said earlier, any research that is scientific has to be observable, reliable, verifiable, replicable. So generalizability also becomes extremely important. And of course, as researchers who are doing research on human participants, we must ensure that we are doing our research ethically and we are not subjecting the population to any kind of disadvantage. So, any questions? I'll be happy to take any questions on how your research has to be structured. But before that, let me quickly summarize what I have spoken so far. So, for structuring your research or planning your research, you will find a lot of templates everywhere, that this is how legal research should be planned, this is how scientific research should be planned. But all of that is only a tool to tell you how. What we have to talked about today, in addition to how, is also why. So why is very important, because why will govern how. So when you're structuring your research, it is very important, going back to what we started with, that you start with a specified research problem. Research problem will lead you to your research questions, which will lead to your objectives, which will further lead you to your review of literature, which will lead to research gaps, which will lead you to understanding the methodology that you use, the research design, the research methods, the research strategies that you choose for yourself. And then from there, how you interpret your data also becomes paramount, because interpretation of data, giving credit to the people who deserve credit, citing other people's work appropriately by putting in references appropriately, by giving proper appendices, all of that becomes extremely crucial when you're structuring your research for either publication or for submission as a research project somewhere, or for fulfillment of a degree requirement. Then all of these steps become absolutely essential. So that's how you structure your research and plan your research. And I cannot repeat the importance of your own research philosophies affecting the direction in which your research will go enough. I'll be happy to take questions now.
Ma'am,
Yes.
I have a question, ma'am. It's regarding methodology.
Yes.
Okay. By research types is empirical and doctrinal approach. Ma'am?
I'm sorry, I did not understand what you said. I only heard doctrinal.
Yes, types of research.
Empirical types of research, yes.
Yes, empirical and doctrinal approach.
Yeah.
Yes, research. My research universe is domestic jurisdictions in Bangladesh, and then population size is 25, and sample size is 100. It's a standard, ma'am.
I did not understand your question, Mr. Rahman.
Yes, my population size is 25.
No, that is not your population. That is your sample. If your population is 100 and you're saying your sample is 25, because your population cannot be 25 and your sample cannot be 100. It has to be the other way around.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
But whether 25 is an appropriate representation of that 100 or not will depend on what you're doing with that 25. Are you only collecting quantitative data, or you're doing qualitative analysis?
Exactly, ma'am. Exactly. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I was just having water. Just give me a minute, please, while anybody can ask a question.
I'm facing some audio problem.
Ma'am, I have a question. What is the difference between explanatory research and descriptive research? It seems both are some confusing, ma'am.
Both are similar, because in explanatory research, you are only trying to explain social phenomena. Yes. Okay. Whereas in descriptive research, through participation also possibly, you are trying to describe how people behave in situations. Okay.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am,
Yes.
sorry, ma'am. Sorry. 1 second, I'll try.
You
Okay,
will, I
Rakesh,
think.
you can use the same device for
Am I audible, ma'am?
video as well as mic. Yeah. Then you can speak.
I didn't know you were also here, sir.
I
Yeah,
was
hello, ma'am. Am I
very
audible?
interesting, so I was listening. So, Rakesh, let me guide Rakesh.
Yeah.
You can use the same device for microphone as well as the video, then there will be no echo.
So actually, I have left meeting from my laptop, and now I am continuing with my phone. I think
Now
now
the
I am audible and clear.
yeah. Now there's no echo.
Yeah. So,
Continue. Yeah.
ma'am, I have also one question.
Sure.
Because we are legal scholar, and I have some scholars in this subject law. So whenever they come, they says that since we are from legal background, we are having more plagiarism, because why? Whenever we use any act, so there that name of the act is still there. And similarly, whenever there is a like definition of any provision, for example, if I say that Article 21, so article the definition of Article 21 is no person shall be deprived of life and liberty except procedure established by law. So when we quote that, obviously it produces more plagiarism. Or for example, we are having this Arbitration Conciliation Act 1996. Then I told my students that you should write in another way, that the Arbitration Conciliation Act, which was a wonderful act enacted in the year of 1996. So just to dilute that particular point from the plagiarism. So what are other methods to for our legal researchers, so that they can have less plagiarism report in their thesis, or whatsoever it is, dissertation, etc.
Okay. So, Dr. Rakesh, I think in the doctoral method, there's also a prescription on how these acts are to be cited in your papers. So, if you have cited them appropriately, then I do not see any reason why they should reflect as plagiarized. They will reflect as plagiarized only if they are not cited appropriately. So if the citation is there, then there's no reason why if it should show up as plagiarism. And even if it does, there is also provision in the software that is being used to check plagiarism to remove citations. So if you've removed citations, then it will not show up as plagiarized. And of course, there are other ways of within the text writing in such a manner that it does not show up as plagiarism, but then that is unethical. So that is not something that we will encourage, because a lot of people consciously make grammatical errors in their text so that it does not show up as plagiarized. So that is unethical. But if it is appropriately cited, there's no reason why it should not pass off as not plagiarized.
Thank you, ma'am. So I think Professor Komal has raised her hand.
Yes, sure, please.
Yeah, sir, I just want, because when I did my PhD long time ago, mine was also on UN Security Council. So every resolution, every convention, so as ma'am just mentioned, you have to be very particular. You can just cite it properly. And other ways to get it out of that plagiarism is to mention there in the plagiarism software. And the last resort is that the guide can also give you a certificate that the thesis was, or the plagiarism is showing more because of these conventions and resolutions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. But I agree with you, but the conventions and resolutions are also published somewhere, right? So the source of publication can be cited in the thesis, and it can be then removed as citations from the plagiarism report.
Yeah, absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct.
Any other questions? I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, please, any other question? Actually, I'm not able to see chat box, so if I'm requesting Tariq sir, if there is any question in the chat box, please read out on my behalf. because of this technical glitch.
No, not given. Questions are not given in the chat box.
Okay, so any other participant want to direct ask question?
That also reminds me, okay, since there are nobody asking questions, also remind me of something that I hear very, very often from researchers, because we also have researchers from other domains also. In some of the presentations, I hear scholars say, "Hamare domain mein to aise hi hota hai." So please remember that the basic structure of a thesis or the process of doing research or writing a research paper is standard. The essential components remain the same. Regardless of whichever domain that you're doing your research in, you have to have a research problem, you have to have research questions, you must do review of literature, you have to have a methodology, you have to have results, and you have to put in references or bibliography. The way it is organized may change domain wise because there are various writing prescriptions and styles. But the essential components remain the same. So please bear that in mind, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful session. Even I was not aware with so many things which I just learned today. So I am also thankful to our VC sir, Tabriz sir, and HOD sir, and organizer of this FDP program, Tariq sir, who has given me this wonderful opportunity to moderate
Pleasure.
this session with Anjali ma'am, who is considered as one of the authorities in the field of research. So thank you so much, ma'am. Now I request if HOD sir want to say some few words.
Thank you, Dr. Anjali ma'am, for giving your time and delivering this particular session. Indeed, you have covered almost all aspects of research planning, and indeed how exactly research has to be carved out, the plan that has to be carved out, research design, how it has to be indeed carved out, especially for the new findings and new knowledge base. So we are really grateful on behalf of School of Law, on behalf of organizing committee, our Honorable Vice Chancellor sir, and entire the participants. I extend heartfelt gratitude to you for delivering this session. Thank you so much.
One more thing.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would like to request to all the participants, there is a feedback form in our chat box. Google link is there. So it is requested to everyone, please give your feed in this feedback form. And it is, I think, remain open for another 15 minutes. So please, you can do this thing. So once again, thanks all. Yes, ma'am. Anjali ma'am, you want to say something?
No, I was just saying that it was a pleasure hosting this session, and thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for explaining everything in such a lucid manner.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, for the great insight. Thank you, madam.
Can I log
so
out
much,
now?
ma'am, once again.
Thank you so
ma'am,
much, ma'am.
Yeah. Tariq
Thank you,
sir?
Dr. Anjali. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
so should I leave this meeting or it should be
So you can leave the meeting, but it's a request for all the participants. Tomorrow at 9:30, we are having our first session for day 2. We are having Professor Fazan Mustafa sir with us. So you all are requested to join the meet at least 10 minutes prior.
Dr.
Join by 9:15.
Dr. Aditi, please brief them for tomorrow's session. 2 sessions we have.
So they all will get a mail regarding the details of tomorrow's session. Just a reminder that tomorrow first session is starting from 9:30 a.m. So please join 10 minutes prior to that session. In the meantime, please fill the feedback form. It's open for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, stay tuned, all the participants. Thank you for joining us. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Dr. Rakesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Tabrez, sir. Thank you. And Azim, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It's a great efforts. Very successful day one. Hope we'll continue the journey in a more fruitful way.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Tariq.
Definitely. Definitely, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Dr. and all, Dr. Aditi, and all of you. Thank you.
Thank you,
sir.
sir. Thanks to our FDP team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Participants, the link of this meet is open for another 15 minutes. So please fill the feedback form. And if anyone is facing any problem, they can raise here. Rakesh, sir, you can leave the meet if you want. Thank you so much.
I want to fill the form, but I am not able to find out the chat box through this email, my phone.
Sir, I'm giving you the link in your WhatsApp.
Yeah.